I wasn't supposed to be home that evening. The whole point of the surprise was to keep it under wraps. Camille had told me weeks ago that she and a few of our closest friends were planning something special for my birthday. I had been expecting a late night in New York, finalizing the sale of my family's pharmaceutical company. But through an unexpected twist of fate, everything wrapped up sooner than anticipated. So, I decided to hop on an earlier flight back to Charlotte, eager to see Camille's face when I walked through the door. The cab ride home was quick, and I remember scrolling through my phone with a smile, anticipating the surprise that awaited me. I thought about calling Camille but decided against it. I didn't want to spoil the excitement. However, as I pulled up to the house, I noticed something strange. Camille's car wasn't in its usual spot. Instead, a sleek black Mercedes was parked in the driveway, directly in front of my garage. I didn't recognize the car, but I assumed it belonged to one of our friends who had come over to help with the preparations. As I approached the front door, I could hear laughter echoing from inside the house. The dim lighting and soft flicker of candles created a cozy atmosphere. However, a strange feeling began to creep over me. Something felt off, but I dismissed it as mere nerves. I pushed open the door, expecting to be greeted by smiling faces, cake, and the warmth of home. Instead, I was met with an unexpected scene that hit me like a freight train. Surprise echoed through the room, with friends huddled around the living room table. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Familiar faces like James, Sarah, and Michael raised their glasses in celebration. At the far end of the room, Camille stood with her back to me, her arm wrapped around someone I couldn't quite see. I smiled, proud that she had successfully pulled off the surprise. But then, Camille shifted slightly, moving in sync with the person beside her. My heart slammed into my chest as my eyes adjusted to the light. Time seemed to freeze as I processed the shocking sight. My wife of 10 years was standing there, not just with anyone, but with Alex, a close family friend I had trusted implicitly. It wasn't just that he was standing next to her. He had his arm wrapped around her waist in a manner that felt wholly inappropriate. His lips were grazing her neck, and her hand was caressing his cheek, as if they were lost in their own world, completely oblivious to the party around them. The room around me went dead silent, like the air had been sucked out. Every breath I tried to take felt stuck in my throat. Camille, my wife, was cheating on me, and everyone in the room was witnessing this betrayal at the same time. My heart raced as shock transformed into disbelief. "Max!" Sarah called, her voice breaking the silence and snapping me out of my stupor. "Come over here. You've got to see this." But I could hardly hear her. My focus was locked onto the scene unfolding before me. As Camille turned slowly, sensing my presence, her face fell, and I could see the panic wash over her. Alex looked equally stunned, like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The atmosphere in the room shifted from celebratory to awkwardly tense. Our friends, who moments ago were jubilant, now stared in confused horror, their smiles fading as they realized the gravity of what was happening. I felt like I was standing on shaky ground, frozen as the truth sank in. My wife was betraying me with someone I considered family. "Max," Camille started, her voice trembling. She stepped forward, as if trying to bridge the gap between us, and explain the unexplainable. But I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. It felt like time stood still as I processed the weight of her actions. "Alex," I said, finally finding my voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "What the hell is this?" My question hung in the air unanswered, as if the room held its breath. I looked around at the stunned faces of our friends, caught in the crossfire of what was supposed to be a celebration, now turned into a nightmare. Camille's mouth opened slightly as she struggled to find words. What could she possibly say to make this any better? "It's not what it looks like," Alex stammered, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate search for understanding. But his voice was lost in the overwhelming silence that enveloped us. I could feel my heart racing, but my body remained paralyzed in disbelief. Camille's expression was a mixture of panic and guilt as she searched for the right words to say. "Max, please listen to me," she begged, stepping closer. "It was a mistake." I couldn't contain my disbelief. "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm and anger, because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear. The tension was palpable, and I could feel Sarah's hand on my arm, trying to ground me, but it was futile. "We were just talking," Camille insisted, her voice shaking. "Talking?" I shouted, my emotions spilling over. "Is this how you talk to people now? By letting them kiss you? By letting them put their hands all over you?" Alex took a hesitant step forward, raising his hand as if he could somehow calm the situation. "Man, I swear it's not what you think," he said. "It was a mistake, okay? A stupid mistake." "Shut the hell up," I snapped, my fists clenching at my sides, the urge to confront him physically overwhelming. I couldn't let him see me break down, not yet. The atmosphere grew heavier, everyone holding their breath, waiting for something to break. My heart pounded in my chest, a storm of rage and humiliation raging within me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to throw something, anything, but I stood rooted in place, staring at the two people I had trusted most in my life. Camille took another step towards me, her face pleading. "Max, please listen to me," she urged, her eyes full of regret. "It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything?" I echoed incredulously. "How long, Camille? How long has this been going on behind my back?" For a brief moment, I thought she might deny it, but then she dropped her gaze, staring at the floor like a child caught in a lie. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "It was just tonight. Just a mistake." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh that cut through the tension in the room like a knife. "A mistake?" I challenged, anger coursing through me. "You expect me to believe that this is the first time?" "Max, please," she pleaded, stepping closer, her hand reaching for mine, but I jerked away. I couldn't bear to feel her touch. I didn't recognize the woman standing before me, the woman who had promised to love me, to be faithful, to be mine. I turned to Alex, my vision blurring with rage. "You," I spat, taking a step toward him. "You've been my friend for years. I trusted you. I let you into my home. You were family." "Max, I swear," Alex started, but I cut him off, my emotions boiling over as I shoved him hard. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table as the weight of the situation settled around us, heavy and suffocating. The tension in the room was thick, palpable, a crushing weight on everyone present. Max stood there, his body coiled like a spring, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. His heart thundered in his chest, the rage inside him blinding and raw. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under him, leaving him dangling in a space filled only with betrayal. He had stormed forward, eyes locked on Alex, the man who had dared to shatter his world. "Son of a," Max growled, his voice low and deadly. He could feel the heat pulsing through his veins, the desperate need to make this man pay. The room exploded into motion. His friends James and Michael lunged forward, grabbing Max's arms before he could land a punch. They pulled him back, their voices a murmur in his ear, trying to calm him down, to contain the storm building inside him. But Max wasn't listening. His vision was red, his mind consumed by one thought. Alex had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable. "You think you can just waltz into my house, screw my wife, and get away with it?" Max's voice cut through the chaos, his words sharp and venomous. "Max, please don't." Camille's voice came from somewhere nearby, desperate, pleading, but her words barely registered. Max could only focus on Alex, the man he had once trusted, now standing in front of him with his hands raised, a look of fear etched into his face. "Max, man, I'm sorry," Alex stammered, his voice trembling as he backed away. "Get the hell out of my house." Max roared, his voice booming, reverberating off the walls. His rage was so intense, so all-consuming. He could feel it echoing through the silence that followed his command. Alex didn't need any more prompting. He grabbed his jacket and darted for the door, leaving behind a stunned room, his footsteps fading as he disappeared into the night. Max watched him go, his body sagging as the adrenaline drained from him. He collapsed into the nearest chair, his hands shaking as he tried to process what had just happened. The room was silent, thick with tension. Everyone frozen in place, unsure of what to say or do. Camille stood off to the side, her face streaked with tears, her hands covering her mouth as if trying to hold in her sobs. She looked at him, but he couldn't bring himself to look back. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, now stood there as a stranger, a painful reminder of the betrayal that had ripped through his life in an instant. Finally, James broke the silence, his voice soft, tentative. "None of us knew, Max. We thought this was just a party." Max turned to him, his face devoid of emotion, his voice flat. "Of course you didn't know. How could any of you have known?" His words were a whisper, but they carried the weight of his pain, his disbelief. This wasn't just some affair hidden in shadows. This was done right in front of me, right under my nose. He looked at Camille, his eyes dark with anger and sorrow. She took a hesitant step toward him, her hand reaching out as if she could somehow erase what had just happened. "Max!" Her voice was shaky, barely more than a whisper. Max cut her off, his voice like ice. I don't want to hear it." His words were sharp, laced with the bitterness of betrayal. He couldn't stand the thought of listening to any more lies, to any more empty words. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for any of this." "Oh, you didn't mean for it to happen?" Max's voice rose, the anger flaring again, each word laced with contempt. "You expect me to believe that this was just some accident? That you just tripped and fell into his arms?" Camille's face crumpled, her tears flowing freely as she tried to wipe them away. It was a mistake. A stupid mistake." Max stood up suddenly, his chair scraping across the floor with a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the silence. He couldn't sit there, couldn't bear the sight of her, standing there broken, trying to explain away what could never be forgiven. He looked at her, his fists clenched, his body tense. Her pain was real, he could see that, but it wasn't enough. Not after what she had done. "You call this a mistake?" he spat, his voice shaking with anger. "A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt. This was a choice." He took a step toward her, his words dripping with venom. "You chose this." She flinched, her body trembling under the weight of his words. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no sound came out. For a moment, Max wondered if there was anything she could say that would make any of this right. But he already knew the answer. There was no going back from this. "Max, I swear," she began, her voice weak, desperate. He cut her off again, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You swore to me when we got married. You swore to love me, to be faithful. Look where we are now." His voice cracked, his anger momentarily overshadowed by the pain he couldn't contain. She tried to reach out, tried to explain, but he was done listening. "Listen to what, Camille?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You've already said enough. You were with him in our house, while our friends were here. You didn't even have the decency to hide it. You couldn't even wait until I was out of the room." He paused, taking a breath as he struggled to keep his emotions in check. "How long?" he asked through clenched teeth, the question hanging in the air between them like a blade. Her eyes widened, filled with fear and regret. "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It was just a night, I swear." Max scoffed, his lips twisting into a bitter smile. "Just a night?" He took a step closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You really expect me to believe that this was the first time?" Camille bit her lip, her face crumbling under the weight of his accusation. Her hands shook as she tried to wipe away her tears, her voice a broken whisper. "I swear, Max, it wasn't supposed to be like this." "Then what was it supposed to be?" he demanded, his voice cracking as he fought back the urge to scream. Tell me, Camille, what the hell was it supposed to be? She looked at him, her eyes wide, pleading, but she had no answer. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She was lost, broken, and for the first time, Max realized there was nothing left to say. Nothing she could say would ever make this right. He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal that had torn his world apart. Camille's voice faded into the background, her apologies, her pleas meaningless in the face of the reality that had shattered their lives. And as he stood there, staring at the woman he no longer knew, he realized he was done. Done with the lies, done with the pain. With disbelief, I echoed her words. It didn't mean anything? I shook my head, my voice low and bitter. Do you even hear yourself? Camille opened her mouth, struggling to find a response, but no words came. Instead, she took a step closer, reaching out to touch me. Her eyes were pleading, desperate. Max, please. I love you. You know I love you, she whispered. The moment her hand reached for me, I recoiled as if her touch had burned me. I couldn't believe her, not after what I'd seen. The bitterness twisted in my heart, darkening into something colder and sharper. Love me? My voice was hollow, empty. Is this what love looks like to you? Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell doesn't look like love. She began to sob, her body shaking with grief and guilt. But it wasn't enough. Nothing she could say or do would make this better. I had given her my everything, my trust, my devotion, my life. And in a single reckless moment, she had shattered it all. I can't believe this is happening, I muttered, more to myself than to her. I turned away, pacing the room, trying to make sense of the betrayal, the lies, the audacity of it all. The woman I had committed my life to, the woman I had planned a future with, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Our marriage, our trust, everything we had built together was now gone. I glanced around and noticed our friends still standing there, caught in the aftermath of the chaos. They looked awkward and stunned, unsure of what to do, their faces painted with pity and shock. Finally, James broke the silence, his voice quiet. I think we should go. He seemed reluctant, as if he didn't want to disturb the fragile calm that had settled over the room. I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak. I didn't want anyone here. I needed to be alone to process this nightmare that had become my reality. One by one, they started to leave. Sarah gave me a sympathetic squeeze on the shoulder as she passed, but her touch felt distant, as if it barely registered. My body felt numb, my mind blank. Once the door closed behind them, I turned to Camille, who still stood in the center of the room, her hands covering her face as she cried uncontrollably. Why? My voice was soft now, almost a whisper. Why did you do it? She lowered her hands, looking at me with tear-streaked eyes, her voice trembling. I don't know, she whispered. I was scared. I was lonely. Scared? The disbelief in my voice was unmistakable. Scared of what? Of losing you, she said, her voice barely audible. Of losing us? A bitter, hollow laugh escaped me. Congratulations, Camille. Because you just lost everything. Her sobs grew louder, and she collapsed onto the couch, as if the weight of her guilt was too much to bear. But I didn't move. I just stood there, watching her, feeling nothing but the cold emptiness in the space where my heart had been. I looked at her. Camille, the woman I'd loved for so long. She was now a stranger, someone who had betrayed me in a way I'd never imagined. My rage, once fiery and consuming, settled into a deep, frigid certainty. There was no going back from this. I turned to the kitchen table, where my phone and keys lay. My movements felt mechanical, like I was watching myself from the outside. I grabbed my keys, the cold metal biting into my palm, and started toward the door. Camille's voice, raw and desperate, called out to me. Max, please don't leave. We can fix this. We can still fix this. I paused, turning to look at her, her face filled with fear and desperation. But it didn't matter. Nothing could change what she had done. Fix it. My voice was eerily calm. How, Camille? How do you think we're going to fix this? She stood up, taking a step toward me, her hands outstretched pleading. I'll do anything, Max. I swear. We can go to therapy, work through this together. Please, let's start over. The absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. Start over? I shook my head. Like this never happened? Like you didn't betray me in our home. She shook her head, her voice trembling. No, Max. I know what I did was wrong. But I love you. I love you. And I'll do anything to make this right. I clenched my fists, the anger surging back. You should have thought about that before you let him touch you. Her sobs intensified, and she fell to her knees, grabbing my pant leg as if she could physically keep me from leaving. Please, Max, she sobbed. It was a mistake. I was stupid, but I love you. I do. I've always loved you. I yanked my leg from her grasp, stepping back, my voice dripping with anger and disdain. Love me? I spat. Don't you dare say that. You don't love me. You love yourself. You love the thrill, the attention. But you don't get to stand there and tell me you love me. Not after what you did. Her sobs were uncontrollable now, her face buried in her hands as she broke down completely. But I couldn't bring myself to feel pity for her. She had made her choice, and now we both had to live with the consequences. Max's world was crumbling. Camille, his wife, stood before him, a shadow of the woman he thought he knew. She tried to reach out, her hands trembling as they moved towards him, but he flinched as though her touch might burn him. There was no comfort in her outstretched hands now, only a reminder of her betrayal. Max, please, she pleaded, her voice thick with desperation. I love you. You know I love you. But the word love sounded foreign to him now. He shook his head, his expression hardened, his heart feeling like it had frozen over. He repeated her words back with bitter disbelief, the emptiness in his voice cutting through her defenses. Love me? Is this what love looks like to you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like anything but love. At that, Camille broke down completely, her sobs ripping through her like waves crashing against jagged rocks. She stood there, crumbling before his eyes, but it wasn't enough to move him this time. He'd spent years giving her everything, only for her to shatter it in a single night. He turned, pacing the room, trying to make sense of the emotional wreckage. He looked over at their friends, Sarah, Michael, and James, who had been silent witnesses to the entire scene. They stood awkwardly, unsure of where to look, sympathy and pity written all over their faces. James finally broke the silence, murmuring that they should go. Max gave them a quick nod, unable to bring himself to speak. As they slipped out of the door, Sarah gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze in an attempt at comfort, but he barely felt it. When they were gone, he turned back to Camille, who was still sobbing. A hollow whisper escaped his lips as he asked, "Why?" She looked up, her tear-stained face full of anguish, and managed to stammer, "I don't know, Max. I was scared or lonely. I don't know why." Scared? Of what? He demanded, his disbelief mounting. Her voice wavered, barely audible. Of losing you, of losing us. Her answer only deepened his anger, and he laughed, the sound empty and harsh. "Congratulations, Camille, because you've just lost everything." Her sobs intensified as she collapsed onto the couch, her guilt pressing down on her until she seemed small, broken. Max remained unmoved, feeling nothing but a cold numbness settling into the space where his heart used to be. He stared at her, seeing a stranger where his wife once stood. The love, trust, and memories they had built over the years had been obliterated by her infidelity. Finally, a sense of resolve hardened in his chest. It was over, and there was no going back. He moved to the kitchen table where his phone and keys lay. The cool metal of his keys bit into his hand, grounding him as he prepared to walk away from the life they had built together. Just as he was about to step out, Camille's voice broke through the silence. "What about us, Max?" Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with grief. "What about our life? Everything we built together. Are you really going to throw it all away?" He stopped, her words lingering in the air. Memories of their life together. The house, the laughter, the years they had shared, flashed through his mind. But then, so did the memory of her with Alex, and the answer became clear. "Yes," he replied quietly, his voice steady. "I am." With that, he turned the knob and walked out, leaving Camille sobbing on the floor, her cries echoing faintly behind him. The cold night air hit him like a slap, shocking him back to reality. Standing alone on the porch, he took a deep breath, letting the silence wash over him. He got into his car and drove aimlessly, the streets blurring past as his mind replayed the events of the night in a ceaseless loop. Eventually, he found himself outside a rundown motel on the edge of town, a place he'd never thought he would be. He checked in without thinking, the numbness guiding his actions as he made his way to the dingy room. He collapsed onto the hard bed, staring at the cracked ceiling as the storm of emotions swirled within him. Betrayal, lies, heartbreak. They crashed over him until sleep claimed him, but even in his dreams, he could not escape the nightmare of Camille's betrayal. When he awoke the next morning, he felt a clarity that had eluded him the night before. The pain remained, sharp and unrelenting, but he knew what he had to do. With a steady hand, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he never imagined he'd call. "Jeff, it's Max," he said when his lawyer answered. "I need to talk to you about a divorce." And with that, he took his first step toward a new life, one without Camille. The love he had cherished and the future he had envisioned were gone, shattered beyond repair. As he left the motel room, he knew that, despite the pain, he was moving toward a life where he wouldn't have to question or doubt. It wasn't the life he had wanted, but it was the life he had now, and he was determined to make it better than the one he was leaving behind.